Hey guys, I'm Jordy, and this is your guide to the 10-man sunken temple beneath the shores of Ashenvale, the Twilight cultist-infested Blackfathom Deeps.
Who dares disturb my meditation? Dust, dust.
Now, Blackfathom Deeps is the first dungeon with major alterations in Season of Discovery, and oh boy, it's a doozy. The first half of the dungeon isn't so bad, but Kelris and Akumai, the final two bosses, are a real step up in difficulty from content up to this point, and you'll need to know how to tackle them to get them down. As far as raid comp goes, the raid requires 2 tanks and 2 healers. Depending on your DPS, you could flex up a healer if you're struggling, but it's definitely not necessary. Okay, so we're gonna go boss by boss and cover the first few pretty quick and spend some more time on the aforementioned later ones, so keep up and we'll get through this. First up, Baron Aquanis. Swimming around this room are various Naga and Murlocs. Clear them and use these stones one at a time. After your third, you'll activate the boss and he'll become aggroable. You'll also notice there are some circling whirlpools. These will force you down underwater, so avoid them. You also see these bubbles moving around underwater. These give you a swim speed buff if, for whatever reason, you're down there. Swim over to them to help you get out of the water. Okay, so the 3 stones are cleared, now onto the boss. He's actually stationary and won't move, so don't worry about his positioning. Now his goal is to chuck your raid into the water and spam frost bolts at you until you're out of steam, so you want to avoid him doing that. He'll apply depth charge to a random raid member. This is an 8-second debuff that once it expires, will throw whoever is near the player back a good distance and likely into the water. To avoid this, we have whoever gets that debuff jump into the water, wait for it to fall off, and then run back up. Better one person than a bunch. He'll also cast Bubble Beam. This is a channeled spell that he'll cast in front of him for 3 seconds, turning slowly and knocking back anyone in front of him at a close range. The melee just need to move behind him as he turns to avoid getting knocked down. Other than that, just don't stand in the storm he summons and take him out. Not too bad. Okay, moving on, we arrive at Ghamoo'ra. He's also pretty easy, but avoid his patrol as you run in and clear all these neutral turtles before pulling him. Once you're ready, drag him to the center of the island and go crazy. He'll quickly put up Aqua Shell, which makes him invincible until you pop it. It has 100 charges, and he'll lose a charge for every instance of damage that your raid applies, regardless of damage, so you're going to want to hit him a bunch of times to remove it. While it's up, you'll see bits of his shell fly off and scatter around the room. If you run over these, you'll take a little bit of damage, but also gain a significant chunk of mana back. So healers and casters can weigh whether you want to take this hit if you're looking to pick up some extra mana. Once the shield's about popped, he'll telegraph that his shell has begun to shatter, and after a couple seconds, will pop, and everyone in the raid will take 700 damage. It's super important the raid is topped off for this, because it will hurt. Once the shields are popped, you can finally DPS the boss. So hurry, because he'll recast Aqua Shell after a minute, and you'll need to burn through it again, so you want to take him out quickly. One last thing, he will sunder his current target, increasing their damage taken by 25% for each stack. So after your tank takes 2 stacks, have your off tank taunt. Let it fall off and then taunt back. No big deal. Okay, not too bad. Let's move on to Lady Saravess. Now, if I'm totally honest, Lady Saravess is the easiest fight in here. I'm not entirely sure what she does because each time we've burned her down without worrying about her ad or anything. She has a freezing arrow that's interruptible, so do that, and a forked lightning that I think you'll want to face away from other people. Honestly, this fight's just really easy. Just burn her down and ignore the ad. Finish it off after, no problem. Okay, on to some of the newer fun stuff. Gelihast the Murloc. Since you last met him, he studied at the foot of Azeroth's dankest Shadow Priests and now looks quite spooky. Clear the room and pull him to the center. First, he throws out a curse, so make sure that you decurse it. Next, he'll cast Shadow Crash at a target on the ground, telegraphed by a big purple circle. Avoid it before it hits you. The healers cannot afford to heal you through this avoidable damage. Next, he'll randomly cast Fear on a player, so dispel it when you see it. And like Ghamoo'ra, he'll apply a debuff called Shadow Strike to his current target, increasing their shadow damage taken. You want to tank swap around 2 or 3 stacks here to avoid the tank taking too much damage. Once he's close to dead, he'll get big and angry and run to his altar where he'll channel a spell and begin healing to full. While he does this, the purple murloc eggs around the room activate and summon an army of murlocs that will run around the room like crazy. These murlocs don't turn, but they do run in a bunch of different directions. So you want to dodge these guys as best you can, avoiding getting hit while also avoiding the purple circles on the ground. We had some success of moving behind the purple eggs, which is where the murlocs spawn, so that you only had to watch one side. But standing in the center of the room is fine so long as you're paying attention and good at dodging balls.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
What?
Any other questions?
Okay, so once he's done channeling, the murlocs start to disappear and the boss reactivates. Have your tank pick him up and continue doing the same thing again. After the second murloc phase, he'll summon a bunch of tentacles around the room with low HP. Everyone should turn and blast these as fast as you can, interrupting their mind flays. Not too bad, just be quick about it. Burn him down, and voila, dead murloc. Alright, after this, we meet Lorgus Jett. This guy is immediately after a gauntlet of Naga and murlocs, each waterfall unlocking a new wave until finally the boss at the end. He's not too bad, just watch what totems he drops. Of the 3 that he'll drop, you're only ever going to kill the corrupted Lightning Shield totem. The other 2, Molten Fury and Wind Fury, should just be ignored. The Lightning Shield will truck your physical DPS as they're pumping quickly into the boss, and so they'll kill themselves from its damage. So as soon as it spawns, press escape, swap, and kill it before returning to the boss. Dodge that Molten Fury fireball that rolls around and keep the tank up because the boss does have Wind Fury. But other than that, he's not too bad. Okay, so we clear this temple of trash and meet the penultimate boss, and definitely the most difficult in here, Twilight Lord Kelris. Now this guy is no joke. First, let's talk about phase 1. His melee hits are pretty weak, but he'll also cast Mind Blast, a single target shadow damage spell, and Shadowy Chains, a version of Chain Lightning. These can both be interrupted in phase 1, which lasts until 35%, so work on getting as many of these as you can to mitigate damage taken. Note that in phase 2, sub 35%, none of his spells can be kicked, so you're going to want to save as much mana as you can for then because things really do ramp up. He'll also cast Shadow Crash like Gelihast at a ranged player, so you'll want to move around as a group to avoid these things while DPSing the boss. It drops a purple cloud on the ground that you'll need to avoid as well, or you'll take damage if you're too close to it. Okay, now the most important mechanic, Sleep. 8 seconds into the fight, he'll cast Sleep on the 2 closest players to him. These 2 will find themselves in the Dream Realm, where they'll see the room is filled with visions of the past, phantasmal priestesses that you must pull and DPS down to reveal their true form, spooky tentacles. Now, as far as we can tell, each priestess that you kill has a chance to spawn a portal that you can right-click to take you back to the normal room. We've seen it spawn with as few as 2 priestesses killed to as many as 6, so you want to kill them as fast as you can to reveal that portal, use it, and reunite with your raid. Inside of this, there are also invading nightmares, little purple elementals that appear where the corresponding shadow crashes land, that if killed, look to reduce his damage in phase 2. I don't think dealing with this mechanic is necessary, I would just avoid it and get back on the boss. If, for whatever reason, you can't kill these priestesses fast enough and reveal a portal, after long enough, they'll aggro and try to kill you. So work fast and get out of there. Once both players are out, he'll recast Sleep after 10 seconds. So the next 2 closest players that aren't the first 2 that went down will get picked. You can force who you want to go down by stacking on top of the boss, and take turns to send people that you think are best suited for this. We really liked a mage and a healer, a rogue and one of the tanks, while the other picks up the boss, any combination so that you aren't taking too much damage off the boss, but also have enough to deal with the priestesses. Warlocks are especially bad for this. The priestesses seem to have high resistances to magic, so avoid using them. Okay, so as we move around the room, dropping shadow crashes, interrupting the boss, and before we know it, we're close to 35%. At 35%, he'll get real mad and buff himself with a damage increase buff and become uninterruptible. As far as we can tell, each invading nightmare inside the Dream Realm gives him a damage buff, but it shouldn't matter. Just spread out because his shadowy chains will hurt if they bounce too high, so melee try to be in stacks of 2 as far from the boss while still attacking as possible, and blast him hard. Hunter pets are valid chain targets here also, so keep that in mind. You want to DPS him super fast in this phase because he does a ton of damage. If you're having trouble, at 35%, have the whole raid pop a Shadow Protection Potion. These will go a long way to mitigating a lot of that shadow damage and help you to survive to get him down. Okay, well done. Down he goes. We touch those torches one at a time and clear this trash, and then move into the final room and face Akumai. Akumai has been a bit busy since we last saw him. His eyes now glow with menace, and he's got a bunch of purple pearls and/or eggs scattered about the room. Okay, he's got 2 phases. Let's talk about the first. In phase 1, we leave him where he's standing and all run in. Every so often, he applies a debuff to his current target called Corrosion. This does 50 damage every 3 seconds and stacks. It's not dispellable outside of a specific way that we'll talk about in a second. Other than that, every 20 seconds, he'll target a random player, turn to them, and start a 3-second conal attack called Corrosive Blast. This is the most important part of this fight. You cannot get hit by this. We have the raid in a tight cluster around the boss, so that when he does start casting this, you can immediately move to his left or right out of the cone to avoid it. If you do get hit, you'll quickly gain stacks of corrosion that you don't want to deal with, so don't. Other than that, as your tank gains stacks of corrosion, they'll want to drag the boss toward one of the 4 water elementals stationed around the room. When they get close to it, the water elementals will siphon off some debuffs one at a time until they grow big and green and eventually become tainted and explode into a bunch of corrosive droplets. These need to be picked up by your tank and killed by your raid. One will spawn for each stack of corrosion that's cleansed on your tank. We opt to have the tank go in around 3 or 4 stacks to get cleansed, and then we pre-move the boss near the next cleansing elemental, killing the little guys and being ready to cleanse again when the time comes. All the while, the raid needs to be avoiding Corrosive Blast. One thing to note here, once the circle around the elemental becomes poisoned, it will now apply a corrosion stack every second to anyone standing on it. So make sure no one wanders too close, you can't afford those extra stacks. Okay. Around 50%, he'll run to where he was standing when you pulled him, get big, angry, and purple, and start his shadow phase. This is where everything changes. Ideally, you've not phased him into phase 2 with ads up, but if so, clean them up quick and then start in on the boss. Alright, so now instead of poison things happening, we have shadow things. He'll still do the breath, but this time it's called Void Blast. We need to avoid it the exact same way we did the corrosive one in phase 1. Additionally, if you're hit by him and the Void Blast, you'll get stacks of a debuff called Shadow Seep. Each stack lowers your max HP by 10% and increases your shadow damage taken by 25%. For the tanks, anything over 2 is really difficult to heal through, so we're going to look to avoid stacking it much higher than 3 before either cleansing it or tank swapping. Speaking of tank swapping, here's what I'm going to recommend you do for this phase. Rather than running to the elementals to cleanse this debuff and spawn ads that you need to kill, we recommend you let your tank get 3 stacks and then having your off tank taunt him. From there, they'll take 3, and ideally by then, the boss is dead. If you don't have the DPS, you can consider having your first tank go to cleanse themselves before running back in and taunting off of your main tank, but don't DPS the ads. Just burn the boss and go for the dub. If you had enough DPS, he'll go down, and you'll be able to collect that sweet, sweet loot. Congrats on clearing BFD, the first updated raid for Season of Discovery, and a strong promise of more to come. Okay, wait, don't turn this off. Just do me a huge favor and like and subscribe before you go. I'll have a bunch of Season of Discovery content coming in the future with more dungeon guides, raid advice, and spreadsheets like I had for Wrath of the Lich King for the eventual updated Season of Discovery raids in the future that you'll want over on my Patreon. Check it out. It's major value and will save you a ton of time. Okay, well, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.